Okay, so we've kind of gone through all the examples and all the different types of restoration, all the different processes. Now I'm just going to kind of wrap it up with some final ideas about restoration. So E.O. Wilson, if you remember, that was the person that helped coin the term biodiversity, and he's been really important in conservation. And in 1992, he said, "Here is the means to the end of the great extinction spasm. The next century will, I believe, be the era of restoration in ecology." So restoration is really a growing field where we've been learning a lot recently about how to restore things and collecting more data on how restoration affects different types of organisms. And there have even now become specialized journals that focus on restoration ecology. It is important to think about what the goal of restoration projects are. Sometimes large corporations will do demonstration plots in really visible areas, kind of as public relations moves. And so it's important to think about whether this is effective for conservation or whether it's just supposed to look good. And so if a company has destroyed thousands of hectares of land, a little tiny plot that's a demonstration doesn't necessarily equal the damage that's been done. So it is important to think about scale. If we're continuing to degrade habitats, we can't rely on restoration as something that's just going to fix it later. Like, it's okay that we destroy this really sensitive ecosystem because, oh, we'll just restore it later. It doesn't really work that way, but some restoration is going to be really important to bringing some ecosystems back. Some ecosystems that are really endangered, if we can get something, even if we can't completely restore, getting them back to something closer to what they were is an improvement, but it's not a license to degrade more areas. So that is something to think about when you're thinking about restoration. And I think some of that wetland no net loss speaks to this. The no net loss policy means that you have to restore a wetland somewhere if you destroy one, but it doesn't say it has to function the same. It doesn't say that it has to be the same type of wetland. And so when we're mitigating or using restoration as a license to degrade other places, we need to remember that we can't always completely restore areas, and that we need more research on how well that ecosystem that's restored is going to function relative to what is being degraded or destroyed. The best long-term strategy is to protect natural communities where they are, which is often cheaper than complete restoration. And this is kind of preventative. Like, we want to use restoration as a tool, but we don't want to use it as a crutch, where it's often much better to just not destroy certain things in the first place. So if we can limit the amount of habitat destruction that occurs in the future, we'll have less things that need to be restored. And restoration, as I said, it's a tool for improvement, not a main strategy. So it's important things to think about. When we're thinking about restoration, we also need to think about what do we need to come back? And think about redundancy in communities. When we're restoring things, as I said, sometimes it's easier to do partial restoration than complete restoration. But how many species do we need to have a successful partial restoration? How far do we need to take it? So there's this really important analogy in conservation, and my PhD mentor said it a lot for his conservation classes. And the idea is that, what if we think of an ecosystem or a community, ecological community, as an airplane, and each species is a rivet on that airplane? How many rivets can you remove and still feel safe flying in the airplane? So if you remove a couple, certainly the airplane's not going to crash. You can get in that plane and it's going to fly great. But how many rivets can you remove and you still can safely fly that plane? How many can you remove and you're willing to personally get in that airplane? And so we need to think about that idea with our ecosystems. How many species should we be willing to lose? Or the flip side is, how many species do we need to restore to an area for it to have some function as an ecosystem, to get our ecosystem services back? What do we really need in the long run? So on average, there are only 2 degrees of separation between any two species in a food web. And that just shows that these communities are really reliant on each other. And even if it's a rare species, it might be important for the overall function of that ecosystem. So I just wanted to point those things out. It is really important to think about what we're losing and what are we trying to rebuild with these restoration topics.